Welcome to another Scott Fox After 9. I am so happy you checked into this episode. Before I get too far into this one, a regular episode where we're going to talk about current events, we're going to talk about news, and a couple of things in particular on my mind. I'll go over that in just a sec. Thank you to everybody who reached out after yesterday's Silent Date Guy update. I got so many feel-good DMs from people who are legitimately happy for my buddy, and I'm happy for him too. I want to thank you for listening to that episode. Thank you to everybody who wrote in. I really appreciate it. I'm here to tell you that, yes, I will keep the updates going, and I am still working on trying to get him comfortable enough to come on the podcast and answer some questions that I know many of you have. So sit tight. It's something I'm working on. Today, though, it is back to work, and there are so many things going on. As I try and read the room, and I do every day, I ask myself, what's important to people today? I'm coming up with three things in particular that I think are on people's minds. Number one, Friday is coming fast. Friday, August 1st is the deadline for Canada to reach a deal with the Americans, or we are stuck with tariffs. The Americans say they're not negotiating beyond Friday. If there's no deal by Friday, we just get tariffs and we're stuck with it until we renegotiate the USMCA. I don't want to end up like that. I think there's potential for a deal, and we're going to talk about it in this episode. On that topic, you're going to hear from a number of individuals, including Prime Minister Carney, former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, who has now let it be known that the federal government asked Stephen Harper for some help on this file. So you're going to hear from the former Prime Minister and Ontario Premier Doug Ford. Another thing on people's minds, what's going on with interest rates? There's an announcement coming down tomorrow in Canada and in the USA. Economists are expecting both central banks to keep rates unchanged. I feel that's unacceptable, and I'm going to touch on that coming up. And we're going to start off with the big story everywhere you go, the Epstein files. Now, the reason that this story is still in the news is because of Donald Trump. Let's be perfectly honest about where we are with this. Donald Trump ran partially on a campaign of transparency. He was going to release the Epstein files. He was going to tell us what we want to know. And it's time that we found out what went on that island and who was doing it. Then Donald Trump pulled an about face and basically said, if you want to know, you're stupid and the whole thing is a hoax. I don't accept that. And I can only think of one reason why that might happen. The only reason I can think of that Donald Trump now doesn't want to give up these Epstein files is because it's confirmed he's in it. He's been briefed. He knows if his name is in there, and it likely is. But he's painted himself into such a corner now that he's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. He has mismanaged this situation so badly by this little temper tantrum he's throwing about not wanting to release the files that no one's going to believe him either way. If the files come out and his name is in it, people are going to call for his head. Get rid of this guy. It could be the end of his presidency if his name is in there. But if his name is not in there, people are naturally going to assume that there was some collusion here and he had his name taken out of there. No one is going to believe it if he's not in those files. And that is colossal mismanagement of what should have been a slam dunk. Donald knows people want the information. He knows they want the truth. And he has demonized the people who are asking for it. Man, this is real bad. Let me play a little bit of Donald Trump on the Epstein files. This is him talking yesterday with EU leaders.
That's such old history, very easy to explain, but I don't want to waste your time by explaining it. But for years, I wouldn't talk to Jeffrey Epstein. I wouldn't talk because he did something that was inappropriate. He hired help, and I said, don't ever do that again. He stole people that worked for me. I said, don't ever do that again. He did it again, and I threw him out of the place. Persona non grata. I threw him out, and that was it. I'm glad I did, if you want to know the truth. And by the way, I never went to the island, and Bill Clinton went there supposedly 28 times. I never went to the island, but Larry Summers, I hear, went there. He was the head of Harvard. And many other people that are very big people. Nobody ever talks about them. I never had the privilege of going to his island. And I did turn it down, but a lot of people in Palm Beach were invited to his island. In one of my very good moments, I turned it down. I didn't want to go to his island.
I mean, that doesn't mean he didn't do anything with kids. It doesn't mean nothing happened on the mainland. He was friends with Jeffrey Epstein for quite a while. Now, I don't know the truth. None of us do. I don't exactly know why Donald Trump is so defensive, but again, I can only assume he's very defensive because he's in these files. If it's something simple to explain, he should be able to explain it. But I did find a couple of other things that I want to play for you that might provide a little context and clarity here. Because again, I think Trump is damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. If he doesn't release those files, God help him. If he does, and his name's not in them, people aren't going to believe him anyway. Let's go to Chris Cuomo. You know Chris from CNN, mainly. Now he is a podcaster and on Newsmax, and he talked a little bit about the Epstein files, namely why there's so many folks on the left that are all of a sudden interested in getting these files. Listen to this.
The Epstein thing is tricky. Let's deal with the easy part first, okay? The left should shut the F up about it, because they weren't into it when they had the ability to do something. They're only trafficking in it because it's bad for Trump. And that's not the basis that we need to get to a better place.
I think that's relevant. I think Chris is absolutely right to call that out. We know there's some prominent Democrats on that list. There's Republicans, there's Democrats, there's many people on there. Some of the Democrats that are now pushing for these Epstein files to be declassified, they're only doing it because they think it's going to be bad for Donald Trump. Or they know it's going to be bad for Donald Trump. They're throwing their own people under the bus because no matter what, I have to think people like Bill Clinton are going down and a number of other very high-profile individuals. The Democrats have never called for the Epstein files to be released. They had all those years under Obama when apparently investigations were taking place. Never said a word about it. Joe Biden just finished being president for 4 years. Not a word from the Democrats. In fact, it was one of those words that you weren't even really allowed to say. Epstein. Ooh, conspiracy theory. And they shamed you if you even brought it up. I agree with Chris. The Democrats have no credibility demanding now that these Epstein files be released because they're only doing it because they know Donald Trump is going to be, he's going to wear it. No matter what, Donald Trump is going to get implicated in this. Right or wrong, whether he did or didn't do anything, he's probably going to be named here. And the Democrats are so intent on making Donald Trump look bad that they'll throw some of their own people under the bus in demanding these files be declassified. Or they're just betting on Trump will never do it anyway. It's dishonest of them to present that way. There is another voice I want to hear from here, though. Vice President J.D. Vance. J.D. is an interesting guy to keep an eye on right now for a number of reasons, namely because he's the vice president. If it turns out Trump is in the Epstein files, I think we agree he has to go. You can't be the sitting president of the United States with that hanging over your head. Whatever the allegation is, whatever it is they say he did, if it's serious, until he's either cleared and exonerated or it's found out that, yeah, it's true, he probably shouldn't be president. That would mean J.D. Vance steps in to be president. And you may have noticed over the last couple of days, Vance doesn't take a lot of questions on Epstein. He likes to talk about the big, beautiful bill. He likes to talk about more domestic issues. He's trying to make himself look more presidential so that it's a seamless transition if Donald Trump has to step down or is forced out of the White House. Yesterday, an Associated Press reporter did get a question in to the vice president on Epstein. Here's what JD had to say.
I guess I'm going to be that person. There are some protesters outside accusing the GOP of protecting pedophiles, and we're wondering what you think are the reasons the U.S. government should shield the client list of Epstein from the public, and what you have to say about any relevance to that here today.
Well, let me say just a couple of things. First of all, the president has been very clear. We're not shielding anything. The president has directed the attorney general to release all credible information and, frankly, to go and find additional credible information related to the Jeffrey Epstein case. He's been incredibly transparent about that stuff, but some of that stuff takes time. You've got to assemble that stuff. You've got to compile that stuff. You've got to redact some victims' names so that you protect the victims. But the president has been very clear. He wants full transparency. He's asked that from the attorney general. And I know, because I talk to her all the time, the attorney general is hard at work on that issue right now. But I think I got to make an observation that there's an interesting thing about this case that the American media seems to totally ignore. For 4 years, under Joe Biden's Department of Justice, the media didn't give a damn about the Epstein files or about the Epstein case. For literally 20 years, the story about this scumbag, and he is a scumbag pedophile, Jeffrey Epstein, he's dead now, but for 20 years, you had Obama and George W. Bush's Department of Justice go easy on this guy. They didn't fully investigate the case. They didn't show any curiosity about the case. And now Donald J. Trump is asking his Department of Justice to show full transparency. And somehow that's a criticism of Donald J. Trump and not Barack Obama and George W. Bush. If you want to criticize the people who aren't showing full transparency, you ought to go after the administrations that went easy on Jeffrey Epstein, the administrations that concealed this case for 20 years, and the administrations that failed to show full transparency. Donald J. Trump, I'm telling you, he's got nothing to hide. His administration has got nothing to hide, and that's why he's been an advocate for full transparency in this case. He's going to keep on being an advocate for full transparency, but while we're focused on that case, Donald J. Trump is also worried about making sure these great workers get more take-home pay and better jobs, and that's the focus of the administration.
So there's some truth and some flat-out misinformation, I think, coming there from the Vice President, J.D. Vance. Donald Trump did say he wanted full transparency. He did eventually tell the Justice Department, release any credible information. That's true. But there's been a lot of obstructionism in the meantime. Donald Trump going after his own supporters, saying they're stupid if they believe this hoax, is wildly inappropriate. Donald Trump, if he truly does want transparency, should be expediting this. And one thing I know about Donald Trump is if he wants something done, it'll get done, and it's going to get done quick. I don't buy that. I don't know that we're knowing exactly what's going on here. They say it'll take time. They told us months ago they were almost ready to go. Then they came out and said, wow, there's basically nothing there. We're being lied to. Elites are trying to get away with raping children. That's how bad this is. They had their way with kids and all the regular middle-class folks here. We just want to send that message that no, you can't get away with that. You need to be punished if you did that. And send a message to anybody who may be running those type of rings or operations right now. And I have every reason to believe it is still going on. J.D. Vance is right, though, in that the Democrats had all kinds of time to look into this under Joe Biden. Under Obama and Bush before him, Epstein was running wild. That's when this whole thing unfolded. Why was nothing done then? Why did the media not care until it looked like Donald Trump was in those files? I haven't made up my mind yet. I'm simply making an observation that Trump is kind of damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. If he doesn't release those files, again, God help him. If he does release those files and his name is in them, it's probably the end of his presidency. If he releases the files and his name's not in them, nobody's going to believe it anyway because everybody has now built it up in their heads that he is in them. I just want transparency. Let's get some truth. And I hope that we can all agree on that pedophilia is not okay, that there should be justice for those victims, and Donald Trump needs to come clean. And I'm going to leave it at that for the Epstein files. Now I want to move on to something else that I promised you. We are down to the crunch here. Friday is the deadline for Canada to get a deal done with the Americans. And we just saw the Americans do one hell of a deal with the European Union. The deal that Donald Trump got out of the Americans was nothing short of fascinating. It was absolutely wild, the deal that got negotiated, in that it heavily favors America. I don't even know why the EU would agree to this. I'll start off here with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Here's him explaining some of the deal with Europe.
Well, remember, the European Union is $20 trillion economy, 450 million people. I mean, it is head and shoulders bigger than all the other Western civilizations. So the fact is the European Union is the monster deal. President Trump did that deal yesterday. We were all together in Scotland. We got the deal done. So here how it goes. The European Union is going to pay 15%, and they sell us $600 billion worth of goods. That's $90 billion for America, and they agreed for the first time ever to cut all their tariffs, cut their barriers, and let American businesses and farmers and ranchers and fishermen finally sell into the European Union massive market. This is huge for America.
I mean, there's no two ways about it. That is an absolutely epic deal for America. Wow. Again, I don't understand why the Europeans agreed to that, because it does so heavily favor the Americans. Why would they agree to pay 15% tariffs and agree to buy all that energy and agree to buy all those weapons from America and agree to open up their markets to U.S. farmers and trades? It doesn't make any sense to me, but for whatever reason, they went for that deal. Pretty shocking, if you ask me. I can't figure out where they're coming from there, but it kind of makes me think that that's where things are going with Canada. If we get a deal done on Friday, it is almost certainly going to include tariffs. Let me play for you just a little bit of President Ursula von der Leyen. She is the head of the European Union, talking about her new trade deal with America.
I want to thank President Trump personally for his personal commitment and leadership to achieve this breakthrough. He's a tough negotiator, but he is also a deal maker.
Whoa. I certainly did not expect to hear that from the head of the European Union. Are you serious? Listen to the praise for Donald Trump coming from the Europeans. What does that mean for Canada? Didn't Mark Carney just a few weeks ago sign on to the Rearm Europe campaign? Now the Europeans are going to be buying their weapons from America. So what do we do now? It's bizarre.
So I think we should not forget where we would have been on the 1st of August. We would have been at 30%. And it would have been much more difficult to get down now to the 15%. 15% is certainly a challenge for some, but we should not forget it keeps us the access to the American market. And what we are also doing intensively is diversifying to other regions of the world. And this opens up new markets, potential new markets. Indonesia, for example, is huge. It's 250 million people.
Okay, there she is explaining a little bit of the philosophy for why Europe took that deal. Again, though, it kind of puts Canada in an awkward position. We're the outlier now, where we don't have a deal with America, and we're one of the only ones. Yesterday, the Prime Minister did a speech out in, I believe he was in Prince Edward Island, and he did get asked a number of questions about how negotiations with the Americans are going.
How likely is the deal by deadline? And what do you say to industry who are obviously anxious about this upcoming deadline?
Yeah, let me start with the second part of your question, which is industry, businesses, Canadians. They are anxious and they are concerned. They don't deserve the uncertainty that's been thrust upon them. They don't like it. They like resolution. But they'd also like they want the right kind of resolution. They want a deal that makes sense for Canada, that makes sense for Canadian business, for Canadian workers. The negotiations are at an intense phase. It's a complex negotiation. You see with the various trade deals that have been agreed by other jurisdictions, European Union yesterday, Japan before, Indonesia, etc., the United Kingdom, that there are many aspects to these negotiations. We're engaged in them, but the assurance for Canadian business, for Canadians, is we will only sign a deal that's the right deal, that's a good deal for Canada. We're representing Canada. We're standing up for Canada. The United States and Canada can do many good things together. We have done that in the past. We can do more in the future, but on fair terms for our country.
That's a pretty good answer. Yeah, he's still working out a deal. Not going to take a deal that's not good for Canada. But let me ask you, one of my great listeners here on Scott Fox After 9, what would you do if you were Mark Carney right now? You heard Ursula there from the European Union say the tariffs were at 30. That's where they were going to stay if we didn't work out a deal before August 1st. So we agreed to 15 because it's a lot less than 30. Do you think Mark Carney should do the same? Should he give up a lot to get a 15% tariff deal? Or should he hold out for no tariffs and the perfect deal for Canadians? And if we don't get the perfect deal, what then? Then what are we going to do? Because it seems like the Europeans are scrambling to align with the Americans. Canada was planning to align with the Europeans, so they didn't have to align with the Americans. What would you do if you were Mark Carney right now? Because the pressure's on. He told us he was the guy who was going to get this done. He took Danielle Smith and Doug Ford off the negotiation team and he said he'll get it done, him and his team. The clock is ticking. Friday is coming. And if Carney's holding out for the perfect deal, that could mean no deal. If you were him, would you take a deal like Europe signed because it's probably the best of the bad deals on the table? Or would you go no deal, we pay 30% tariffs and try and figure out other trading partners? I don't even know what I would do in that scenario other than keep pushing for a good deal for Canadians. I want the Prime Minister to succeed here. I want him to get a good deal for Canada. But I also don't want him to leave this so long that there's no deal for Canada. Would you rather have a bad deal or no deal? It's a tough situation. It really is. I don't envy the position the Prime Minister's in, but I'm going to point out part of the reason that we're in this position is because of the Prime Minister and his team. How's it going down there in Washington? And why don't we get very good updates on this? You know, the media asks all kinds of things. This entire news conference, they didn't go very far in depth on what's going on and what's at stake. Is supply management on the table? Is this digital services tax still on the table? Carbon taxes, are they still on the table? I'd really like to know how the Prime Minister and the President are getting along when it comes to negotiations. We know personally they seem to like each other, but how's it going when it comes to negotiating?
The White House says it's not focused on Canada in its trade talks. So what is your government going to do to convince the U.S. of the importance of finding a resolution?
It's a negotiation. It's a negotiation. Take what's said in the public domain as part of that context.
I think that that's relevant too. The Prime Minister is right. A lot of what we hear is posturing. It's meant to send a message to the people and to undermine the leader you're negotiating with. We do it all the time in Canada. All the time we leak out stuff to make Donald Trump look bad. The White House saying they're not really seriously engaged in negotiations with Canada is intended to make it seem like Mark Carney is not doing his job. In reality, we don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. I would just like to hear a little bit more.
If Canada can't reach a trade deal with the U.S. by Friday, what was the benefit of giving up revenue collection from the digital services tax so early?
I think well, first off, it's a hypothetical on a hypothetical. So we'll see where things land in terms of the negotiation. There are pros and cons of that tax, as there are with any tax. And taking the step has some advantages for us in terms of our economy, in terms of digital investment and others. So we'll see the benefit of that and move forward. And look, what we're doing, and today's about this, last week at the Council of the Federation was very much about this, is building our country, bringing it closer together. This is one real tangible example, but there are many more that are less immediately obvious. Changing regulations, changing certain aspects, prohibitions on people moving across the country to practice their trade, moving goods, etc. And then these big nation-building projects.
Which he hasn't even told us about yet. You know, he's standing there in front of the Confederation Bridge announcing that he's going to cut tolls by more than half. Okay, that just means that we're going to pay the tolls for these people who cross the bridge. Silly. He's got a backdrop there that says, "Building Canada Strong." As far as I'm aware, that bridge is already built. People are using it. They've been using it for years. What exactly are you building, Mark? I haven't seen anything yet. You mentioned nation-building projects. Where's the list of what we're building? It's getting a little ridiculous here. I gave the Prime Minister a lot of time here. I've been very, very fair with him. But, you know, it's really time to pay up here, Mark. What's getting done? We want to hear more about domestic issues. Yes, absolutely. With America, you've got to get a deal done, and I'm hopeful you can do it. But what is going on here at home? Because it seems like we are a lawless society that is completely overrun with immigrants who are completely gaming our system and taking resources that Canadians desperately need, not the least of which is money, housing, and food. I don't understand what's better now. We had a whole federal election. Is your life any better now than it was a few months ago? Feels basically the same as when Trudeau was in charge. We have a much more competent Prime Minister. We have a much more transparent Prime Minister as well. Carney does seem to answer a lot more questions than Trudeau ever would have. But our lives aren't any better now than they were a few months ago. Carney's really got to step up. He is on the clock here, and people want answers. Mark, if you're listening, I'm here to tell you the middle class is rapidly losing their patience. You had some time to get started. You dropped the ball on a whole bunch of things, including not making Parliament sit through the summer. Our legislature should be working right now. We still don't have a list of nation-building projects. Still don't know if he's going to get rid of the laws that make Alberta so unhappy. We don't know what's going to happen with this digital services tax. He said it was a hypothetical that we took it away. So I'm assuming that if we don't get a deal with the Americans, the digital services tax is back? What a mess. What a mess. I hope the Prime Minister finds his stride and gets this together, because right now it seems a little frustrating. Yesterday, Premier Doug Ford from Ontario did a little media availability at Queen's Park. That's the Ontario legislature. He talked about a whole number of things in the federal realm, including trade and immigration. Here is Premier Doug Ford.
I'm here with my great Minister of Labour, David Piccini. I guess I'll start off with talking about last week. I thought it was a very successful COF meeting. We had an opportunity to sit around the table with the premiers and the Prime Minister. For the first time, the Prime Minister showed up to a COF on our invitation, which was very, very good due to the circumstances we're facing against Donald Trump and his tariffs. We came up with consensus around the table in how we tackle this situation with President Trump. And, just my opinion, you heard about the deals with Japan and the European Union and then ourselves. We're working on August 1st. We'll see what comes from that. But I've always taken the approach dollar for dollar, tariff for tariff. And if he wants to attack our hardworking steel workers, aluminum workers, then we have to meet that 50% tariff. As well, what we did communicate around the table, and all the premiers agreed that we need more say into our immigration process, very, very similar to Quebec. We want to really focus on economic immigration. Along with my comments about work permitting, I don't want to take the responsibility off the federal government, but in saying that, if you have a pulse and you're healthy, you need to be working. You come to our country. First, they have to go through the system. So I'll give you an example how the system's getting worse through the federal government, not better. They say they issued 70,000 work permits. Well, we have 90,000 people coming in. And altogether, there's about 139,000. David, do you have the numbers down better? I think across the country, you're mentioning over 280,000 backlogged. I'm very concerned, which the Prime Minister never mentioned to me, about cutting off the funding in literally a month in September for everyone in the hotels. I have quite a few asylum seekers in the hotel in our area and across, especially in Niagara and other areas. The federal government has to go in there and find out who's eligible. The whole system has to have integrity. Who's eligible, who's not. We're a very welcoming country, very welcoming province. And I've always said, people come here, they come here, and it's a privilege to be a Canadian. You go out there, you work hard, and you contribute to society and you pay your taxes. What's very concerning to me is that we're spending $1 billion. And I've had a few phone calls about, I'm not handing out work permits to every Tom, Dick, and Harry. It's just not happening. What we are doing is when we're spending $1 billion and it's taking 2 years and people are sitting there, not because they don't want to work, because they don't have a work permit. So that's $1 billion there. Then the feds are adding another $1 billion on accommodations. And if they get rid of that, that's another $500 million, a burden that falls on the taxpayers of Ontario. And I just go back to, again, if you're here, if you're healthy, you need to be working. You need to be contributing to society. You need to be contributing to the tax base.
I'm just going to pause the premier there because, he did walk it back. I think I played it for you just last week. The premier talking about maybe we'll issue our own work permits, get some of these asylum seekers into the workforce. Well, myself and a number of other commentators called the premier out on that, saying, listen, that is not a good idea. We have got a huge unemployment problem right now, and I'm guessing Doug doesn't realize that. You know, he said he's not going to do the work permit thing, but he's still insisting these people got to get jobs. Where? Canadians can't get jobs. These are asylum seekers. No, we shouldn't be spending, $1 billion provincial and $1 billion federal on hotels. Kick them out. Get rid of them. Doug, the best thing you could do, the most helpful thing you could do, phone your bestie, Mark Carney, and tell him to get on it. I don't care who they are. Let's hire dozens and dozens and dozens of adjudicators. Someone who can listen to someone's claim for asylum and say yes or no. And if it's a yes, you get a work permit right there on the spot. Here it is. If they say no, you're not an eligible asylum claimant, bye, get out. Why are we putting people up in hotels? Do you know how much that's raised the price of hotels in Ontario? Because so many of them are already overflowing with the government's people. It's complete madness. Does the premier not understand that there are no jobs? If he needed a job right now, it would be very difficult to find one. Many Canadians are experiencing that, and it's about to get real bad. Deloitte forecasting 140,000 Canadians are going to lose their job between now and Christmas. 140,000. And you want to let the asylum seekers into the workforce? That's tone deaf. I have to think he just doesn't understand. There is a problem that the middle class is facing that no one in power seems to understand. We are squeezed financially to the brink. And the jobs are not there. And the jobs that are there are not paying very well. Not like they used to anyway. Businesses know we're going into a recession. We're in one, but they haven't acknowledged it formally. No one is hiring right now, Doug. What do you want to put these asylum seekers out there for looking for jobs? No. You get them gone. Rent out the International Center there. It's right by the airport. Yes or no? You got 5 minutes to make your claim. If it's a no, and the vast majority of these asylum claimants, it's going to be a no. Right to the airport. Gone. Bye. We're not paying for people to stay in hotels anymore. We're not giving them $250 a day or whatever it is to live off of. We're just not doing it anymore. Canadians have had enough. And Doug, you're supposed to be on our side, not on Carney's side. Come on, Doug. The middle class has seen enough of their tax dollars get wasted on this. We don't need to compete with the asylum seekers anymore for jobs. Stop it. Get rid of that idea altogether. We're not giving out work permits for asylum seekers. It's just not doing it. People that are permanent residents, they don't need one because they're permanent residents. Everybody else, you're going to have to wait until the rest of the country can find a job. Then you can come in. Normally, if there's no jobs, we wouldn't even let people come in. It's complete madness. Let's hear just a little bit more of Premier Doug Ford yesterday.
A lot of these folks that are here, they want to work. We're paying them to sit around, which is crazy. But then they're out there standing on certain corners within the city, and contractors will come by, pick them up, and they're paying them cash under the table. So we're losing a tax base on that. And these people have come here for a better life. And if they truly aren't asylum seekers, and they aren't being threatened in their own country, that's up to the federal government to make sure they're very clear. The people that aren't here based on that, they need to move forward and go back and then reapply through the immigration process.
There it is. That's the message. Doug, that's it. Stop. Full stop. This is a federal government issue. The federal government is letting these people come here because the feds want them here. There's no other way to look at it. If we're being black and white, and I was earlier in this episode about Trump and Epstein, the only reason that makes sense that he doesn't want those files released is because he's in them. Well, if we apply that same standard, the only reason there's so many of these people here that we're paying daily and to stay in hotels is because the federal government wants them here, either because they see them as potential voters or something else. If there are asylum seekers out there working under the table, yeah, I guess I don't blame them for wanting to make money, but it would be a heck of a lot easier if we just dealt with the problem. This is a federal government issue that Ontario and all the other provinces need to stay out of, except for hardcore lobbying. Couple things I want from premiers, all of you. You need to get this federal government, because you guys have the influence. You guys are the ones driving the bus here, not Carney. Get them to deal with the insane amount of people that are here that shouldn't be here. Bail reform. It's got to be dealt with. You know, I heard this statistic this morning. One of the things that is making the rounds on talk radio today is this completely asinine story about car thefts. Let me read you just a little bit of it. The pace of auto theft is dropping in Canada. Equite Association says over 23,000 vehicles were reported stolen in the first 6 months of the year across the country, down more than 19% compared to a year ago. First off, they're not saying the number, they're saying the percentage. I just heard it this morning on a news station in the Greater Toronto area. Oh, auto theft down 19%, and they want to credit the federal government's efforts for that. That's an irrelevant number. Let's talk about how many were stolen. 23,000 vehicles in 1 year. Sorry, half a year. We're on pace for 46,000 vehicles to be stolen. That impacts all of us through our insurance and things like that. Not to mention the terrorization of our neighborhoods, the glorification of crime. When is this government going to do something about it? Again, I want this deal done with America. I really do. But there are also domestic issues here, and the premiers should stay in their lane, worry about things that are actually provincial problems. And if it's not a provincial problem, stick the feds with the problem and the bill for it. I don't want my Ontario tax dollars paying for hotels at the airport for people who shouldn't even be here. And we're giving them money. It's pure insanity, guys. Absolute insanity. One more thing I want to play for you. Yesterday, our former Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, was doing a sit down. It was like a fireside chat kind of thing. And they were talking about Canada-U.S. relations. And Prime Minister Harper pointed out he has been asked to help out and give some perspective on how to get a deal done with the Americans. Stephen Harper is an economist. Stephen Harper led us through the 2008 financial crisis. Stephen Harper had great budgets that were released on time, that were fiscally responsible. That's a man who understands where Canada should be. And he knows where we should be because we were there when we were under him. Here's a little bit of what Stephen Harper had to say.
Prime Minister Harper, you've been a fierce advocate of free trade throughout your entire career and have fought almost against protectionism. How do you look at the current world in terms of the protectionistic tendencies that are creeping in? And then two, is free trade now passé?
Well, look, I'm obviously concerned about what's happening. And look, just to be clear, I wrote about this in my book, Right Here, Right Now. There are very few trade relationships in the world that are purely free trade. You know, countries do want to protect things. They do have national security interests, these sorts of things. But that said, we tried to greatly liberalize trade, and we'll talk maybe a bit later about what we did in my term of office. We created almost all of Canada's modern trade agreements except USMCA. Look, that has been the basis of post-war peace and growing prosperity around the world. Now, I do think some really serious mistakes have been made along the way. And, you know, the mistakes along the line of just because you are for liberalized trade, that, you know, the assumption that means that any kind of trade deal is a good deal. And the most infamous, I don't mind saying, is really the terms on which the West, the United States, and ourselves and other allies, the terms on which we admitted China to the World Trade Organization, which essentially allowed China to conduct, in the name of free trade, a neo-mercantilist trade policy. Their policy has not been about the mutual benefits of free trade. It's been about accumulating surpluses at the expense of other countries and using those for geostrategic objectives, competitive objectives. And, when they can sell to us and we can barely sell to them, like, that's not a liberalized trade agreement. And it was a big mistake, and there have been some others. So, you know, when President Trump says There's some trade relationships that have to be fixed. Some national security considerations have to be brought in, and in particular the China thing, and there's some others. There have to be better reciprocal access. That's all true. But you should be under no illusion. Like I'm an economist, and I'm actually my specialty was fiscal policy and economic history, and comprehensive protectionism. The idea of using tariff barriers to raise revenue and comprehensively relocate industries, like this is a failed economic policy where it has been tried. And so I am worried about that general direction. I don't think everybody's going there, though. I don't think this country will ever go there.
He is still... I always like Stephen Harper, and that's my bias. I'll admit that. As a conservative, yeah, I mean, he's still the gold standard for conservative prime ministers other than Brian Mulroney in modern history. Stephen Harper was a great leader for Canada, and we can agree or disagree on a lot of his social policies, but financially, economically speaking, I think we can all agree Stephen Harper navigated us through rough waters and left the country better off than the way he found it. I think we can all agree on that. Purely on finance. Don't talk about any of the other stuff, the social issues, just on finances. The guy knew what he was talking about. You could hear that. You could hear that in the answer. That was a very thoughtful answer, well thought out, well researched. But he's a little boring, and that was part of the knock on Stephen Harper. He'd been prime minister for a number of years. Unlike Justin Trudeau, who went from a majority to 3 minorities in a row, Stephen Harper went from minority and earned the trust of the people to the point where he was getting elected with big majority governments. Eventually, people just got bored with him, and Trudeau came along promising lots of weed and had a little charisma, and people thought, oh, here's the change we need. Think of how different things would be in Canada if we hadn't made that choice in 2015. If we'd given Harper even just one more term to continue Canada on the path he had us on, where would we be now? It's almost sad to think of how strong and prosperous we could have been. Friends, I'm going to leave it at that for today. Right on time, I believe. I appreciate you downloading this episode. Tomorrow, another one is going to touch on interest rates. Just quickly before this one wraps up, tomorrow, the Bank of Canada makes its latest interest rate announcement. Economists are expecting the Bank of Canada to leave the rate as is. They say if we get a rate cut, it'll be a nice surprise. Well, I would like a nice surprise. And I think just about every member of the middle class would. Just about anybody with a mortgage or a line of credit or a car loan would like that nice surprise of another interest rate cut. But it doesn't look like they're going to do it. And everybody says the reason they're not going to do it is because of the June job numbers. Do you remember when we talked about that? I believe that was last week too. And I told you the philosophy. StatsCan puts out all these numbers that seem completely preposterous, but people just blow it off as, whatever. There's no way they created that many jobs. But then the Bank of Canada takes that information and says, okay, well, based on the hot job market that we've got, we cannot cut interest rates. It'll lead to more inflation. But if the jobs numbers are bogus, then the decision to leave interest rates alone is bogus as well. It's a cause and effect kind of thing. I've been saying it for years. StatsCan gives just enough cover for the Bank of Canada to do whatever they want. And whether StatsCan is right or wrong, they revise numbers from time to time, and I'm sure another revision is coming. I don't believe those June job numbers, but those June job numbers that they said were great are going to be the reason that we're going to go through another month or two of insane interest rates in this country. And it's sick what they're doing to the middle class. We'll talk more about that tomorrow, friends. Have yourselves a great day. Thank you for listening. I will leave you with the great sounds of Pat James and the Whole Truth. Hey now. Oh.